welcome back to episode 132 of Tall Boy Radio. Now, there's just me tonight in terms of the hosts, as unfortunately Andy is away on holiday, and Gaz, well, it's Gaz's wife's birthday, and he thought he'd be able to sneak away for an hour or so, but she was having none of it. So let me introduce our guest tonight, and he is a man of the cloth, and we go back, quite a long way. But Richard, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell our audience just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Richard, and it's a real privilege to be here on this fantastic podcast, which I hear has gone pretty much all the way around the world, which is amazing. So me and Adam were old school friends. And I subsequently became a church minister along the way, and that kind of began at school, didn't it? That's where the kind of journey began.
It did, and we mentioned it a little there before we started recording, and we have mentioned it, like I said, on the podcast before. So my first awareness of you having any interest in religion was you gave a talk in the lecture theatre about. Do you remember much about that? Do you remember?
Totally remember it.
Well, it had quite an impact on me at the time. It really did. It really made me think, and largely it was down to a school teacher by the name of Dougie Barnett, who was one of the more eccentric teachers that people had. And I remember talking to him about it and like asking him his opinion on religion. And you would expect, as a science teacher, that he would perhaps have a set way of thinking. But he really took us by surprise, because he sort of said, I remember him saying to us very clearly, that we were so different from anything else on the planet that he could not accept that evolution was our reason for being. He totally believed that we had to be put here. And that for me was a bit of a light bulb moment, because I thought it really, really made me think. What are your memories of that day?
Yeah, well, I'm being very nervous, that's for sure. I think that's why I remember it so clearly. Yeah, because I had, I guess I'd become a Christian. That was a brand new language to me. Shall I just briefly recollect what happened, just for the listeners?
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah, I don't want to be too boring, but so we were doing A levels, weren't we? We were A levels, sixth form college, and I'd actually gone through a period of depression, which I hadn't grown up with any faith at all. Hadn't believed in God, hadn't seen the relevance. If I ever thought about God, I just thought, well, God can't be there, because all this rubbish stuff that we see in the world, injustices, famine, whatever, the kind of natural disasters, that there can't be a God, otherwise all this stuff wouldn't happen. As I say, I ended up getting quite depressed, culminated in me trying to take my life. So I took an overdose of tablets, and then after I came out of hospital, another member of the sixth form said to me, "Have you ever tried praying?" And I guess because I was so low, I actually, the words stuck on my mind. I went home that night, and at that point, my parents weren't Christians. They didn't believe in God either. But I saw at home there was a book by the old American pastor Billy Graham, and because of what this girl had said about prayer, it was called Peace with God. So I just saw the name of the book on the spine, picked the book up, and it said, just began to explain about Jesus, about how life is a journey, and sometimes we can feel a bit empty because we're searching for something. Billy Graham was saying searching for God, but we haven't found that whom we're searching for. And as I read this, I thought, you know what, I can identify with this. And then very simply that night, I simply said, I remember the words to this day, I said, "Jesus, if you're there, I pray that you'll take away this pain that I'm feeling." Following day, went back to sixth form, and I sat there in the common room, and I just had the most overwhelming experience of peace. I'd never had anything like it in the whole of my life. And I knew that I wasn't kidding myself. It wasn't that I kind of wished this feeling of peace upon me. Why would I? Had no reason to wish a feeling. It just wasn't a kind of emotional, contrived thing. And the only conclusion I could come to was that prayer that I'd prayed the night before had been answered. And then I thought, well, actually, if I've prayed to Jesus here, that must be real. So I went and found this girl, Rachel Butler. I don't know if you remember her. I went and found Rachel, and I said, it's a long time ago now, isn't it? I said, Rachel, I've prayed and I feel totally different. And she said, "Oh, you've become a Christian." And I remember I said, "I've done what?" I had no idea what she meant even. But then actually she began to explain that, I'd met with Jesus. And some people, I can say more, some people, as you can imagine, come to faith very gradually, very intellectually sometimes, particularly those from a scientific background. Other people, it can be a bit more experiential and, sometimes happen fairly dramatically, I suppose, which is what happened to me. So then ended up telling the story, as you remember, in the it was a packed lecture.
It was,
Wasn't it?
It was a very full lecture thing. I've never seen it so full, actually, voluntarily anyway.
So that was 1990.
Wow.
It's the time.
I'm sure we're not that old. It must have been more recent than that.
Bit of grey hair.
Yeah. Well, be grateful you've got grey hair. That's all I'm going to say from a bald man.
Yeah.
So that's interesting then. So your experience then, obviously, it's a very unique one, isn't it? That in terms of how the fact it's always interesting that there's somebody there who would say something to you that puts you in that line of thinking where it had never occurred to you before to reach out and actually have faith in something that was probably beyond any of your thinking before that. So is that what's made you then, after that, did you decide to dedicate your life to this based on what somebody else has really done for you in many ways?
Yeah, I guess I simply couldn't deny what had happened to me. I couldn't deny that experience, and I just knew that it wasn't self-manufactured. That it just felt like the real thing. And so I guess because it had been such a life-transforming moment, parents saw the difference in me. They themselves became Christians a year later. They were. I remember my mum really became Christian through reading the Bible. She didn't realise you could get modern translations of the Bible. She thought it was always like Old English and everything. And my dad, interestingly, he was commuting from Alsage, you're still there, in Alsage down to Birmingham, and he ended up listening to contemporary Christian music in his car and thinking about the words. So kind of bit of music influence, Bible influence. But I guess for me, I'd had such a transforming moment. I guess I always knew then that I either end up being a minister or maybe, I don't know, cross-cultural worker, missionary, whatever we call in different parts of the world. And then I suppose just over the years, what I went through is just, if anything, it's just been strengthened even further from that which I've seen and experienced, continued in my own life and the lives of others, despite the curveballs that life can throw at you.
Well, we do know that it can. We do know that it can. So, what path did you take then? Obviously, I went off to university afterwards. I'm sure you went off to university and did something.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I went off to University of Northumbria, did a politics degree. Some people say it's the best training there is to be a minister doing a politics degree. But did that for 3 years, and then took a year out in Kenya. I fell in love with Africa. I've been to about 14 African countries over the years now, so that's just been amazing. And of course, the church there is a lot more dynamic, and it's growing at a much faster rate than it is here in Europe. So that's been amazing to spend some time with some really amazing African church leaders. So I had a year out in Africa, and then went to Sheffield to do a master's degree. That was international politics, and then started working for a church in Sheffield. I then applied to do a PhD, and I just had my proposal accepted, and I was just about to part with the first bit of cash. And the church leader in Sheffield just called me and said, "Richard, are you absolutely sure that this PhD at this moment in time is the right thing for you? Should you actually be starting to consider, being a minister?" And as I thought about it, I thought, well, maybe you've got a point. So yeah. So I actually did a PhD much later in life alongside ministry. So then 3 years trained to be a minister down in London, and then went back to Sheffield, 3 years as a minister in Sheffield, 5 years in Leeds, and then been down here in Bristol now for over 10 years.
That's quite an experience. So 3 years training then to be a minister. Yeah. I imagine there's nothing like Father Ted.
It's not as good as that.
No, I fear as much.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And actually, the patterns of training have really changed over the years. You know, the old days, you'd just be stuck full time in the college, but it's all church-based training now. And so people who are trained now, they're generally ministers of churches that can't afford a full-time minister. So they have like a part-time minister who's doing training alongside. So it means that the stuff the college is teaching has got to just be so relevant because the men and women who are trained are being grounded in the local context, really. So,
So you're based down in Bristol now.
yeah, that's
So
right.
you got your diocese down there. So
Yeah.
in terms of the different, I'm always fascinated by the fact you're Roman Catholicism, and yada yada yada. Ultimately, worshiping the same God, yet all coming at it from slightly different aspects. So which churches that you are a member of then? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I'm a Baptist minister. Um, it's funny, I'm probably simply a Baptist minister because the first church I ever went to, so I'd become a Christian at school, and this same friend said to me, "Oh, why don't you come to my church?" Which was a Baptist church on West Street in Crewe, which you all know well.
I do. You might have a shop just down the road.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so started going to West Street, and so I suppose that was my early formation, was in a kind of Baptist context. But the whole denominational thing in the UK, it's just changed so much for the better now. The kind of mainstream church, the denominational stuff is just far, far less important. So if I give you a current example of that, so I was leading a Baptist church here in Bristol, but the largest, numbers are not that important, but the largest church in Bristol, a church of about 2,000, is an independent church. So that wasn't part of a historic denomination. And they then said to me, invited me to come and work for them and to start a new church in a different part of the city, because they've got lots of people who live on that part of the city and are traveling across the city. And I guess one of the things that COVID taught us was the importance of the local context, isn't it? And neighbours and all that stuff. And actually small can be good as well, particularly people with mental health issues increasingly struck that to go into larger churches can just be really daunting and intimidating. So actually there can be a place. Well, at one level, large churches can be good because you can be anonymous if you want to, but actually sometimes that sense of going into a big crowd, for a lot of people, it's not great. And so just started a smaller church. So that's an independent church. So they've kind of seconded me. And we've actually been renting the premises of a Methodist church. So I'm a Baptist minister working for an independent church using a Methodist church building. And certainly in Bristol, Adam, and I know it's the same across the country now, the flavour of church is just not the issue. The issue is how can we work together? How can we collaborate, particularly where the poor and the marginalised are concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know I got married in St. Peter's in Elworth,
Okay, nice.
and they did a lot of services with different churches locally. So, and they weren't always, like you say, of the same denomination. But obviously, I don't live in Elworth. So one of the things that I did, the reason why we chose that church, by the way, my wife's grandparents were married in that church, so it was really important to her, to have it, to get married in that church as well. So one of the things we had to do, because obviously we were in part of that diocese, was the Alpha course. Is that something you've got any experience with?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've known a lot of people who've had a very positive experience on that, and I mean the numbers across the world that have gone through Alpha, and sometimes people go through it and then they might even go through it again. What was your experience, Adam? Was it a positive experience or?
It was on the whole. I'll be honest with you, I really quite enjoyed it because obviously you sit down, you watch the videos, and then you have a discussion.
Yeah, right.
And like you say, a couple of the guys who were in our group afterwards, because obviously split off into different groups, there was a vicar in there who had, was virtually on the point of retiring, and he was just doing it, I think, just out of interest, and obviously just to lend a little bit extra support to the guys doing the group. And then there was a couple other people who were already members of that church as well, and just wanted to re-establish their faith. But for me, I found it very, very interesting. The only one bit that really I found very peculiar was we did like an away day, and there was
Okay.
a little bit about speaking in tongues, which I found I found a little bit unusual, a little bit uncomfortable, if I'm really, really honest. That
Yeah, I
was,
don't know.
yeah, but
Did they explain it, or did it just kind of happen with no explanation? Or
no, they did explain it. They did explain it, but you know, you can tell me I'm wrong, but
I don't know.
I've always had this sort of feeling that that something like that, you know, speaking in tongues and being able to converse with the angels, as it were, that it wasn't something that we should, I would have thought personally, be capable of. Not just
Mm.
an everyday schmo like me, anyway. That's for sure. But yeah, that was the one bit I found a little bit unusual. But for the rest of it, yeah, I found it really, really interesting. I did, and then
Yeah,
we did another course as well, about marriage in general through them.
fantastic.
So yeah, so they really were a very engaging church and really quite modern as well in their approach. The music they played wasn't the old-fashioned hymns. They had,
Exactly.
yeah, they had all the instruments
It
and what have
sounds it sounds like the kind of churches that I've been a part of, and I think one of the good things about Alpha is that it has shown people. Obviously, faith is what it is. It's faith at the end of the day, but I think it has shown people that there is a kind of intellectual coherency about the Christian faith. It's not just people not thinking about it. Some of the stuff to do with the manuscript evidence for the fact that the Bible's not being changed and kind of tampered with and stuff. But actually, there are people in the Christian faith who are using their brains as well as being experiential,
you.
which I just think has given it a level of credence.
Yeah.
Um,
There's another church I wanted to ask you about as well,
yeah,
and just as a point of interest. Are you familiar with the Universal Life Church?
I
It's
don't think so. No, tell me.
So they are largely internet based. So it's obviously
Mm,
American as
okay. Yeah,
you
yeah,
could
yeah.
you possibly predict.
Mm,
And basically you can literally anybody can apply to be a minister through them, you know, and it's mainly for America. So for example, I were to apply to be a minister, which predictably I have on an afternoon on the internet, and I can then conduct wedding ceremonies and what have you in America, but not in England. You have to be obviously paid to be a celebrant over here. I understand that.
okay.
So yeah, so it's and they are non-denominational. So
Right.
you don't have to have any real belief in faith. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely, it's encouraged if you do, and it doesn't matter what you believe in or which
yeah,
God
yeah, yeah.
or which who you believe in.
Mm.
But the one key thing is you have to have a belief in doing the right thing. You know, their motto is "Do that which is right." And I wondered if you're familiar, whether you come
No,
across it. It's not very
no.
popular in the UK.
Well, I'll check it out. So is it a kind of, does it use the Bible or talk about Jesus, or is it more kind of life principles or
It's life principles.
yeah,
However, it's not just sort of Christian faith based. You can be a Buddhist, you can be Hindu,
okay,
you
yeah,
can believe in whatever you
yeah,
like, but it's just a matter of spreading that word and doing that which is right. Which I find it an interesting principle because
yeah,
it's one of those things that if you look at, say, something like Buddhism, there's two different paths, isn't there? There's the lesser and the greater path. The greater path basically says, yeah, you believe in the Buddha, you believe he existed, you believe he did
mm,
everything that he said that he did. And then you have the lesser path, which sort of says, well, actually, no, these are just teachings. You don't really need to believe that any of these things actually happen. But the important thing is the morals of the story are true. The Noble Eightfold Path is true. You know,
mm,
the four precepts of being are all true. And that for me is a little bit like the ULC is you don't necessarily have to believe in all those things.
mm,
But if you believe in the principles and about
yes,
doing what's right and the way you should treat other people, I always think it's quite an interesting entry level
yeah.
into religion.
No, that's interesting. We've got to have this. The more understanding we have, the more respect we have for different outlooks. I think it just helps, certainly.
Mm,
I guess alongside that, I guess one of the things that I have encountered over the years, and it continues to be, I guess, an encouragement, a challenge, is where I have also seen people from other religions also come to know Jesus. So that's been an
mm,
interesting. I do I do a fair bit of interaction with what's, you're probably familiar with the term, the persecuted church. Hence my visits to Africa and stuff. And so churches in countries and contexts where they're really small in the country, the religious freedoms are taken away. I just had a WhatsApp conversation with someone earlier. They're in Somalia. One of their friends has just been in prison because they've been talking to someone about Jesus. And so it's been fascinating, a real eye opener privilege for me to actually be working with some of those some of those people. And one of the things that has struck me, continues to strike me, is sometimes in those persecuted contexts, there are people who are coming out of other religions for whatever reason and coming into the Christian faith and actually are staying the course despite the persecution. Which is just, I was at a safe house for persecuted Christians just a few months ago, and actually these people have been abandoned by their families. And these weren't crazy people, these were sensible individuals who'd come, they just felt that they wanted to explore different faiths, come to an understanding and experience of Jesus. And just to hear their life stories, just immensely challenging, really. Or some of them people have had dreams. I don't know if you've come across that, Adam. Had a guy in our last church, and I have to tell you this story. Being the cynic I am, this is terrible, isn't it? And apologies to anyone who is an asylum seeker here. I've worked, I do a lot of stuff with asylum seekers. I was in our church in Leeds, and I had this guy, talking about speaking in tongues. I had a guy turn up at the church, and he said to me, I've had this dream of Jesus. I woke up in the middle of the night speaking a language that I've never spoken before. And he said, I've just come to faith. What do I do? Can you support me? A Kenyan guy. And of course, as I say, being the cynic, I thought, you know what? You're just trying to, you're trying to win me over for your appeal case here. But actually, as I began to get to know him over the days, weeks, I realised actually this was actually the genuine thing that had happened. And beyond this is when sometimes faith goes beyond the rational, isn't it? It later turns out that his sister, actually living in Kenya, was praying for him at the very moment that he had this encounter with God during the night, where he ended up speaking a different language and had this vision of Jesus. And he's still going strong now. So it's taught me to be a bit less cynical, but there are some fraudsters out there, aren't there, and things.
There's one or two. There are one or two. Well, that's the thing. I think when you hear stories like that, I think your first thought probably should be to be cynical as well in most cases. Well, that's quite interesting, actually. That is really quite interesting. But just taking you back then to your visits to Africa, then what motivated you first to do that?
Yeah, well, I guess simply, I just wanted to take a year out, experience a culture, sample life in something that was so different to what I'd known, and then I'm sure that quite a few of your listeners will have been to Africa. I went there and just absolutely loved it. Loved the culture, loved the time that people had for each other, loved the way that they wanted to listen to each other and learn from each other. So just really fell in love with the continent. One of the perks of being a minister is every 7 years or so you get a sabbatical, and so I went back there in 2018 and travelled across Sudan, Somalia itself, Somalia, Tanzania, Ethiopia. It's just a really real rich experience. Then I've done quite a bit of stuff with kind of African asylum seekers coming to here, whether Somalis or Sudanese. Lots of them, as I'm sure there's all over the world now, aren't there? It's a tough world that we live in, and so it's one of the more enjoyable parts of my job, I guess. A real privilege.
Well, that's good. And something else as well, like when we talked about you coming onto the podcast and talking, you told us about another gentleman who's here with you today.
Yeah,
we're going to introduce
absolutely.
shortly. So, did you want to tell us a little bit there about some of the other things that you do?
Yeah, I'll say a bit of a we all, I'm sure everyone who's listened to this podcast, we want to make a difference for the better, don't we? We absolutely want to make this world a better place. And so when we moved to Bristol, if you can imagine it, the church that we went to was a very kind of pretty comfortable church. It's a very middle class church. We love the middle class. I'm middle class myself. It was on the edge of Bristol, and it was kind of just looking out towards the very white, very middle class suburbs. And I guess what I did with my wife Nikki is we began to transition the church so actually it faced towards Bristol. So it really became a city church. So we established food bank, which was just a huge learning curve there and a first-hand experience what people were going through. So we gave away food, clothes, got so busy. Then as we were doing that, we rightly began to ask, actually, it's brilliant being able to serve people with food, clothes. You've got a benefits advisor in, but then thought, actually, is there something more that we can do? And that opened two parallel journeys. one of those journeys was a journey of understanding of people in addiction, because obviously, some people coming into food banks had a really good job and privileged backgrounds, but other people had actually had a lot of kind of curveball thing, gone through a lot of trauma, and sometimes that had resulted in addiction. So I went and actually stayed in a rehab in Bristol for a week, because I just wanted to improve my understanding of what it was like for guys. But what I didn't imagine then was that after I'd spent a week in this rehab, I actually developed friends for life. I'll introduce Ian in a minute. Just amazing guys. It's a male rehab. Just to hear their stories of courage, of life transformation was just astonishing. So we began to do some work with people in recovery, and also people in addiction. Then alongside that, we then set up 2 houses for the homeless. There's a charity called Hope into Action. They've got about 100 houses around the country. They partner primarily with the church. They help the churches to house the homeless or those vulnerable to homelessness. So we did that as well. And so ex-offenders, the house is still there now. I changed churches about a year ago to work for this new church, but ex-offenders, homeless, people just wanted to be part of supported community. So I could perhaps introduce Ian at this point.
So Ian, then, did you want to tell us then a little bit about your experiences then, and just some of your interactions with Richard and the journey that you've come along?
Well, me myself, I wasn't actually brought up a Christian. And I had a lot of addiction issues and stuff like that, and that most of my faith came from when I got sober, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I know Richard from rehab I was in. I was in there for what, 6 months, I think I was in there for. Don't even know what else to say.
Yeah, you said a bit about your time as homeless and.
Oh yeah.
A bit more about the addiction as well, Ian, what it was, the pattern of life and stuff.
Oh yeah, I spent 15 years on the streets, basically, in Plymouth.
That's good. It's good.
Yeah.
You were using during that time, weren't you?
Oh yeah. I were basically a heroin user, crack cocaine, speed, basically anything I could get my hands on, basically, at the time. And my faith, actually, a lot at the time. I had a few suicide attempts and stuff like that, but half-hearted, basically, and quite often I'd question, what were next? I think that's where a lot, I did a lot of research. I even listened to Christian music, stuff like that, and listening to a lot of words, and I think a lot of my faith came through that, yeah.
All right. So obviously you talked there about being homeless. Was that a part of your addiction, or did the addiction follow just to take away some of the pain and the discomfort of being on the street?
Say that again, please.
So you were saying there that you had addiction issues. Was that what led to you becoming homeless, or is it something that followed on once you were?
Yeah, I started doing a lot of speed and that, and I won't say I was fully addicted when I come homeless, but the addiction, proper addiction, followed being homeless from
Right.
Yeah.
And was that literally to deal with the pressures of living on the streets?
Well, yeah, definitely, yeah. To be honest with you, eventually after a bit, I think it got quite comfortable. It's all and it was quite scary to think about trying to change.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I think any set of circumstances you become acclimatized to it, and then change is actually more difficult. So obviously meeting Richard then was a big part of getting your life back on track.
Yeah, so I lived in another supported housing before, and actually there wasn't really any support there. It was basically it was drug service support basically, and quite often I sometimes feel that they're not that bothered. You know what I mean? It's all money, I think. You know what I mean? And so I actually moved into Hope into Action, which is one of it. We had 2 houses. I lived there for 4 years. I mean, I've actually just got my own place actually, but beginning of this year.
Oh, fantastic!
Oh,
Fantastic.
great news! Yeah, great news.
And what did you go through the 12-step program then? Is that part? Because obviously religion's a big part of that.
No, I didn't. I went to the odd meeting, but my way was basically just keeping myself busy, occupied, doing maybe good. No, I used to like doing voluntary work and stuff like that. I mean, so just occupy my time and doing it because I think a lot of my addiction were about self-worth, and if you're doing good for some people, I mean, it gives you that bit of self-worth, doesn't it? I think
It does. Yeah,
absolutely.
I can understand that. Yeah, absolutely. And Richard was just telling us that you are. What is it that you're doing now then?
I work in a care. It's a 24-hour care home for learning difficulties.
Wow.
So,
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's quite a challenging job, but it's worth it.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. And obviously you've got your own place now, which is also great to hear that your life is back on track. So tell us a bit about your experiences with Richard, obviously, because as we alluded to at the start of this episode, myself and Gaz, who's now on the podcast here, for people will have spotted him. We obviously we know him from school, so our experience with him was a little bit different. I'd be interested to hear about your stories of meeting him.
We were roommates, weren't we?
Yeah, we were roommates.
Explain that.
Yeah, we were roommates in rehab, and I'll be honest with you, I can't actually remember that much about it now.
Well, you were a nice roommate, weren't you? I was really nervous about being in this rehab.
You got beat up first, did you?
I did. I had cushion fights. I was ambushed. I was, my gosh, everything happened to me in that rehab, didn't it?
Yeah, we got him to break a few rules, which you wouldn't expect from a minister, would you?
Do you remember going swimming and throwing all the inflatables at me?
Yeah. I wanted to do that when I got baptised.
Yeah, because Ian was baptised as well, which was wonderful just a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
But Ian was brilliant in the house, and we both got a love of football, so we were chatting football, weren't we? And and then so when you came out, you then went into a different supported house that didn't really work out, did it? The support wasn't there, so then came to us.
Actually, the support wasn't there, but it turned out because I knew the Hope Interaction was opening the houses up at the time. It was pretty good timing because I moved in the day it opened, didn't I?
Yeah.
And about a week later, everyone in the house I was living at got to give them a notice. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So pretty good timing.
Perfect timing.
And Ian's taught me a lot of stuff because he's just done so amazing. He's virtually the only one of his peers who hasn't relapsed. So we recognise that relapse is part of the recovery journey. So full respect for anyone who has relapsed, but Ian hasn't, and so actually he's become a real mentor within Bristol here. He's known right across the city, for the way he's turned his life around and just what he's modelled. So I've just learned so much, and he's fantastic now. So if I meet people in addiction now, it's Ian that I tend to go to for a second opinion and get a bit of wisdom from him.
Wow.
It's just been amazing.
So excuse my sort of ignorance if you've mentioned it previously, but Ian, you sort of mentioned that was it sort of Portsmouth you said you're from. So how did you sort of venture from Portsmouth to then meet
Plymouth?
Plymouth. Oh, don't get those two mixed up football-wise. That was a bad mistake. Sorry about
that. So I don't support either team anyway. I'm from Sheffield.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. That's all right. Who do you support?
I'm a Sheffield Wednesday.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, well, I might come on to that about how you support them in a bit. So how did you get from where you were then to sort of meet Richard? Was that in and around Bristol, or have you travelled there sort of slightly later on, or?
Well, we met when in rehab, didn't we? Yeah. When you stayed, and I was going to Woodland Church, which is the biggest, isn't it? The biggest in which was actually a lot more local to me.
Yeah.
And eventually I just thought, I don't know why I started actually. I think it's because I was getting a lift. I was getting a lift to buy one of the people from Fish Ponds.
Right.
So that's how, yeah.
And I guess what happened with you, Ian, you were signposted to Bristol for rehab. You had to choose a rehab to go to, didn't you? So you were signposted here. And then I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ian, but it struck me that you had something of a faith. You'd had some positive experience of the church, but not a massive ownership of faith. And again, that I guess what's happened is your recovery has gone, has strengthened, as you become more conscious of who you are, your self-esteem's growing back. I guess your self-ownership of faith has increased. Ian plays in the worship group now in the band at church and stuff. I mean, that's a big deal, isn't it, to stand in front of other people playing a guitar and things. And would that be right, Ian? That sense of ownership.
Yeah.
It must feel sort of quite positive, I suppose, to draw on the experiences that you have had to now then sort of self-reflect and reflect where you are now. You've got your own place, you've got yourself a job, you'll be playing in a band, that self-worth has come back. So that must be nice and positive and give you nice positive sort of affirmation that actually you are on the right track.
Yeah, it is, but it's sometimes like very surreal. I mean,
yeah.
So,
is it what you can't quite believe that you are where you are after what you've been through? Yeah.
So just out of interest then, Ian, like Richard just said there, that what is unique about your good self is there that you know most people during that process, relapse is a recognizable part of it, but you didn't. What do you think it was that stopped you from relapsing?
I think it's knowing how low I went. You know what I mean? And there's been a couple of times where I've choosing around relationships and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Where I had one breakup and thing where I nearly got to that state, but then it's just I think it's just willpower. A lot of willpower with me. I mean, a lot of people say that it's stronger than willpower, but I've not found that yet. So.
And you've kept yourself in community, haven't you?
Yeah.
So one of the with the houses and stuff, and we still do it now, even though you're not in the house. It's that sense of.
I put that myself down to is it mentor?
Yeah.
For houses, so yeah.
That sense of community, no embarrassment about saying when you're struggling or whatever, when things are hard.
Yeah.
What was that phrase at Shandos? The say ouch
when it hurts.
Say ouch when it hurts. And you've done that, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've done that, and you've got the confidence to do that.
And that's a huge thing, isn't it? Because the sort of the wave and the tide of sort of people being aware of mental health, there is a bit of a stigma attached, in particular for men, to sort of say that they're struggling. But I suppose if you are in an environment where there's no real solitude and you are around people that will be accepting of the journey that you've been on and will be accepting of the thoughts that you might be having, that must fill you with quite a sense of sort of belonging, I suppose, that they're willing to accept the journey you've been on, accept you within their community, and actually it's quite an open community to talk about the issues that you have sort of surrounding addiction and mental health and that sort of stuff.
I don't know how to answer that, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And Richard, I'm just saying from your point of view, Richard, it must be. I mean, obviously, you must take great, I suppose, I say satisfaction, if that's even the right phrase, of the journey that Ian has been on, and you helping him along that path, and I suppose the journey will continue because there's always a chance of relapse. So it's becoming stronger and stronger every day, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an enormous privilege. What we're trying to do now is multiply these houses across the city. So we've got about another 7 or 8 churches that are wanting to, to step out of this and to grow in this now. Because the problem in Bristol is just so huge, and there's so much isolation. So people are dealing with addiction or family breakdown or stuff that's caused them to go to prison, and the cycles are just being repeated all the time. And somehow it's just working out how we can, as you say, Gaz, create communities of belonging for people.
Yeah.
And actually help people to see actually there is there's another way. And then when faith comes into that, that's fantastic. But we also recognise that people are faith is, we're constantly talking about Jesus, but we're also recognizing that, people are vulnerable as well. So we try and do that really. It's a balance. We try and be really respectful and certainly don't force stuff. But it's been
That's the best way, isn't it? Attraction, not promotion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And I imagine it's something that you've seen. We talked a little bit offline, actually, obviously during the pandemic and lockdown, the extra pressures, a bit of pressure cooker that put on people's lives there. You must have seen this situation repeated throughout that and just become much more challenging and more numerous in that time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that only, the pandemic just exacerbated everything really. And I guess with the way the churches were operated, we were always grateful with the government that there was always a little bit of exemption for the most vulnerable in the community. And so those exemptions within the regulations, we really used to the max. Do you remember at church, Ian, when we were only allowed a tiny number of people gathering unless someone was on team, weren't they?
Yeah.
You could have team there, but only a very small number of people actually streaming it. So I suddenly started creating all these new team positions because I knew that these guys just wanted to come and be a part of things and just be serving. But yeah, no, it's it's tough.
Yeah.
And I guess as well, people's finances have gone down. There's not as much money in the church as there was now, but there's a great appetite. And when when other church leaders in the city meet the likes of Ian, they think actually, we'd love to do this.
Yeah.
I wasn't an expert at all. I've just been on a learning loop, and being around Ian makes it very easy to learn. So,
Brilliant.
I think it's wonderful though that there's a recognition, and although unfortunately when there is a recognition, it's because people are struggling and people are finding life very difficult. But I think it's wonderful that there are people out there like yourself and other members of the church and even outside of the church that actually really want to make a difference in people's lives. And I take my hat off to you and to anybody out there who goes out there and takes part in anything that's altruistic. Just to make a difference in someone else's life, because I can't stress the importance of that.
Yeah, no, and I suppose for me it would go back to my that sixth form experience of that life transformation. So I suppose I came to know a hope which I didn't know before, and so I guess I've come to know that hope. I've come to know that transformation in Jesus. So that's what has just been the constant motivation, as well as the love for people alongside that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we just lost Gary from the call. No doubt he'll join back in a second there, but he appeared to have frozen. God bless him. So yeah, he is. He's left the call. He will be back in. But no, really important, interesting there that, like you say, that it's your own personal journey that you then reflect on, and it helps you then to share with other people. And I think that's important. And do you need other people to have that journey themselves? Or is it something that you can share? You can bring them along just through sharing your stories and through your tales and Ian's tale there.
Just say the question again.
Yeah. Do you find it's important for someone to have their own journey, or do you think you can bring people on board just from hearing yourself and Ian's journey, or is it people's troubles and travails that get them on board as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the kind of trials and tribulations, because I've known a fair few people with a very authentic, passionate Christian faith, and actually they would say, to be honest with you, I've had a very trouble-free life. So I don't think it's necessarily rooted in having to go through troubles. I think the key thing is this personal ownership of faith. If it's going to be authentic, because in a sense we're not, for me, it's a bit cliche, but I wouldn't even refer to myself as religious, because almost like religion is something you do in a sense, whereas I would say my Christian faith is much more just how I live, really. It's not so much what I do or what I don't do. And I think if you haven't got that real authentic ownership of faith, I think the risk is religion can just become a list of do's and don'ts, and go to church and do this, do that, or the other. And I think that's what we've moved away from a little bit. And in a way, the pandemic, bizarrely, was quite useful for the church in that sense, because it actually, when churches were closed for a period, it actually made people realise, actually, what is it to be a Christian? It's not just going to church, is it? I can't go to church. We're not allowed to do church for a period. So people have had to take stock and say, actually, what is this about? What is it? What's the bread and butter of the Christian faith?
Absolutely, yeah. I never thought of it that way. I guess I always, you see the challenges brought upon by the pandemic, but I never actually thought there were benefits. There were benefits too as well when people had to start looking at things and how they can do things differently, and what things actually meant to them. So, what do you think? What do you think you would be doing now? I mean, obviously, I'm not. You found faith, and taking you back to that start of that journey. What do you think you'd be doing now if you weren't a vicar? Do you still think you'd be participating in things like you're doing now with Ian?
I don't. In all honesty, I don't think I would. And full respect to listeners out there who may be doing very similar things, not from a faith background. Full respect to you. I think probably for me, I had this interest in politics. I probably would have probably done something in that respect. Maybe the BBC correspondent traveling around the world. That would have been the dream job, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to do political reconstruction of Somalia. That's what the PhD was, and that was before September the 11th. So I sometimes thought, actually, if all that had come to be, I could have maybe done a bit of a, specialist like academia or, that kind of niche. But no, it's. I guess I'm happy doing what I'm doing. You sometimes think, what could have been, but actually, I'm totally fulfilled, and I guess I wouldn't really. Well, I've got that sense of this is what I'm made to be doing. This is what I'm about, and so sometimes you think the grass might be greener elsewhere, but actually, if that's not what you're wired to do, there's no point doing it, is there? So.
What just out of interest then? What is your favourite part about your job? What is obviously I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say. Actually, it's going to be what you're doing there with the likes of Ian and in Africa. What is your favourite part of doing what you do?
Yeah, it's seeing. Again, it sounds cheesy, and forgive the language. It's genuinely seeing lives transformed. Lives transformed by the love and the hope of Jesus. Whether they're people in recovery or whether they're people who actually have had a very pleasant life with no outstanding issues, but have just come into a faith dimension. So it'd be that inner transformation, which results in outer change for the betterment of society, really. So that would be the great. So we had one of our teenagers baptized at church just on Sunday, and that was just fantastic. Just to be a privilege to be at this baptism with this 16-year-old, real, genuine ownership of faith. Had taken a bit of stick at school for being a Christian and stuff, and you just think, actually, to be baptizing you this morning, that's just really, really special. So it's those kind of moments.
Yeah, fair play. Just a phrase you've used a little bit there. Just for our listeners, can you clarify what you mean when you say ownership of faith? Because I think that's really important. That's really key to your message.
Yeah. So I guess what I mean by ownership of faith is really living relationship with Jesus. Is knowing Jesus as a friend and just putting him first in your life, which I think is a little bit different. And I don't knock it, but I think it's a bit different from someone who's just going to church and has just been doing that all their lives. So at our last church, we had there were lovely people. We had quite a large group of people from Poland who'd grown up in the Catholic faith. They came into our church and they began to realise that there was a dimension and a closeness of knowing Jesus that they hadn't experienced in at least their expression of the Catholic faith. As Catholic faith is expressed differently wherever, not stereotyping things, and so they suddenly thought, yikes, we didn't know church could be like this. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but there was an intimacy and openness. So a number of those guys ended up getting baptized and real transformation. So I think it's just that closeness to Jesus, both experiential and then grounded in things like Alpha, which looks at the kind of rational, the intellectual. There is some intellectual rigor to the faith at the same time.
Indeed. So, just like I say, we all came from a very small town in South Cheshire. Is there anybody else from school that you're still in contact with? Whether it's through your faith or.
Let me think. Yeah, I'm in contact with she's Kay Adams. She's Kay Carter now.
Okay.
Do you remember Kay? And
I
she's,
do.
Her Christian faith is just strengthened. There's the Alpha course, which is a great way for explaining the Christian faith. There's also Christianity Explored, very similar. She actually is full-time for Christianity Explored. Do you remember Ben Micklewright?
Yeah, I remember Ben, yeah.
He's in Cardiff. He's got a lovely family now, and he's very involved with his church there in Cardiff. So they're probably the two. Oh, Victoria Clark. Victoria Clark, do you remember?
Yeah. Dad taught us at the school.
Yeah, exactly. And she's the one that took me to West Street Baptist.
There you go.
So she's and actually, yeah. So she lost her sister sadly in a car crash. So she had to go through that from a Christian perspective. What does that mean? How can God actually allow that to happen? But actually, through that, has just held on to her faith, and is just amazing. All the stuff that she's doing now as a teacher, and again involved in her church. So it's great to be able to sustain these friendships, isn't it, through the ups and downs of life.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Some names that I haven't heard for a long time.
Yes.
So just to take you back there, then, just a little bit there, if you don't mind me asking you about that. So you said at the very start, before you found Christianity, before you found religion, and before you had Jesus in your life, that you would look on the world, and actually, sometimes we do. There are some wonderful things happening, but we can focus on the miseries that are out there at the moment, and a lot of people do over these last two to 3 years. And obviously, talk about Victoria's journey there. Yeah. How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile the things like that happen, and your belief in religion? Obviously, I'm not suggesting that it ever wavers, but how do you reconcile the two?
Yeah, and it's a key question, isn't it? Because none of us live life blindly. So I think I've just accepted the fact that the world is somehow broken. The world is just not in a perfect state, and that imperfection can just be manifest in a whole load, of different ways. That it's just not perfect. Some of those imperfections we don't understand. Some of them we do understand. We recognize that some of the stuff we go through is caused by the wrong behavior of others. And some of the stuff I've seen in Africa, I've seen the natural disasters, but I've also seen corruption, which has just also contributed at least to the frailty of some of those disasters. So I think it's a recognition that the world isn't perfect. And I guess all the way through this, what I've seen time and time again is that, for me, in my view, that the help and the strength that God can provide through Jesus has just been. I've just seen people just come through the worst, the most appalling traumas, and yet they've known God through those times. We've got a lady on our team at the moment here. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying that she lost her 9-10-year-old son, victim of a drunk and drugged up driver. Here in Bristol, just traumatic. So she's had to process these questions. She now leads the Alpha course at our church.
Wow.
Because her conviction in God, it's just that sense of we are living in a fragile, imperfect world. And maybe sometimes I think maybe, we're always very quick to say God doesn't step in. And obviously in the rawness of pain, that's an understandable reaction. But I have sometimes wondered over the years whether God also perhaps steps in, but we don't know that he's stepped in. Who knows what our lives might be like if, there haven't been some kind of interventions along the way. But yeah, I certainly do not belittle anything that anyone has gone through. Yeah.
Oh, that's fair enough, and I appreciate that. We didn't discuss what questions we were going to ask at the start, so I apologise sticking you on the spot there. Well, no, I really very, very good answer to that, to be honest with you. That ultimately, we are going to face these troubles and travails in life. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But whatever your faith, whatever your faith is, you've got that level of support with you by just believing in something, and I think that's fantastic. So that brings us up round about the hour mark. We appear to have lost Gaz from the call again. He did briefly show his face, but has gone again. He only lived next door, actually. He could have just popped round and jumped on my internet. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us, both yourself, Richard, and both Ian, and sharing your stories and your journeys. I really, really appreciate it. If you'd like to just say your goodbyes and leave our listeners with any message that you really want them to take away from this.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Ian, or shall I? You want to say bye to them?
Yeah, thank you for having us. Yeah, like I said earlier, say ouch when it hurts.
Yeah, so that's good. I like that. I like that expression.
Yeah, and same from me. Just thank you. Just a fantastic privilege. And I think that I guess one of the things we touched on tonight is just reach out to others if you need support. It's corny and cheesy, but I'd say if you can find a decent church somewhere near you, maybe give it a go, and you might be surprised with what you find.
There you go. And there's two people there who know just a little bit about that, because that's exactly what they did, and which made a difference in their lives. And it doesn't even bear thinking about where that could have gone now if it wasn't for that intervention of faith. So thank you for sharing those two very personal, very different but very personal journeys with us. I really, really appreciate it, and I know our listeners will too. So thank you, good night, and take care.
Thank you.